Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S3303063 Paul Revere's Ride by Shanna Curry. Paul Revere was a busy man. Every day he worked in his silver shop, made buckles and bowls, made teapots and trays, even made a chain for someone's pet squirrel. When people in Boston needed a false tooth, they came to Paul Revere. That's because Paul was also a dentist. He made the false teeth out of hippo tusks. At night, Paul closed his shop. He tucked his children into bed. He kissed his wife goodbye. Then he went to a secret club. The club was called the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty were mad because America was not its own country. America was a colony. It was ruled by Great Britain. British soldiers lived in America. The British added extra charges or taxes on things the American colonies bought. Many colonies did not think this was fair. They did not have a vote in making the laws. They did not want to follow them. When the tax collectors came, the colonists tied them to flagpoles. They covered them with tar and feather. They chased them out of town. The British stopped some of the taxes, but not all of them. They taxed tea. In 1773, 3 British ships landed in Boston. They were filled with tea. Paul Revere and the Sons of Liberty decided to fight back. They painted their faces so no one would know who they were. Then they climbed on board the ships. Smash! They opened the chest of tea. Splash! They dumped the tea into the water. That's it, said the King of England. He sent more soldiers to Boston to make the colonies behave. The colonies called the soldiers redcoats because of their red uniform. One day, Paul heard that the redcoats were planning to march on the town of Concord. Concord was across the river from Boston. 2 of the colonial leaders, Sam Adams and John Hancock, were staying nearby in the town of Lexington. If the redcoats found them, they would arrest Sam and John. Paul had to warn them. It was a risky job. Paul and his friend Robert Newman had a plan. Robert would hang lanterns in Christ's church. There would be a warning in case Paul did not make it. 1 lantern meant the redcoats were going to Concord by land. 2 lanterns meant they were crossing the river in boats, then marching to Concord. On April 18, 1775, the redcoats boarded their boats. Paul told Robert to hang 2 lanterns. The redcoats were going by war. Paul raced to the river. 2 of his friends waited with the rowboat. There are many stories about what happened next. One story says that Paul was in such a hurry, he forgot his spurs. Luckily, Paul's little dog had followed him. Paul scribbled a note. He stuck it into the dog's collar. "Take this home," said Paul. Dog ran off. A few minutes later, he came back. He had the spurs in his collars. Another story says that Paul climbed into the boat, but he had forgotten something else. What if the redcoats heard the boat's oars creaking? A neighbor lady leaned out of her window. "What's wrong?" she whispered. Paul told her his problem. The lady threw her petticoat down. "Good luck," she said. Paul tore the petticoat into strips. He tied them around the oars. We do not know if these stories are true, but we do know that Paul and his friends made it past the British. When they landed, Paul borrowed a horse. Then he galloped off into the night. Paul won all the houses he passed. He had not gone far when a redcoat spotted him. Giddy up, cried Paul. He left the office in the dust. Paul finally found Sam Adams and John Hancock. Oh, shh. He told them his news. Then he headed to Concord. 2 other colonies went with him. Suddenly, 6 redcoats jumped out of the woods. The other riders escaped, but Paul was surrounded. Was this end of the Paul for Paul Revere? No, Paul thought fast. He told the redcoats that hundreds of colonists were on their way. The soldiers were scared. They took Paul's horse, then they rushed off to save themselves. By now, it was almost morning. Paul had been riding all night, but he had one more job to do. John Hancock had told Paul there were important papers in a trunk in the town tavern. Paul had to get them before the redcoats did. He hurried to the tavern. Paul and a friend found the trunk. But when they got outside, the town square was filled with redcoats. Bang! Paul heard the shot. Many people call it the shot heard around the world. That's because it was the first shot of the American Revolution. The war lasted for 8 years. Paul stopped making silver. Instead, he made cannons and gunpowder. He printed money for the colonies to use. In 1783, the colonies won the war. The America became its own country. Paul went back to making silver. He was still a busy man. He had lots of children and lots of grandchildren. In his spare time, he opened a hardware store and a copper mill. He also learned to make felt. For years, not many people knew about Paul's ride. Then in 1860, a poet named Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a poem about it. Paul Revere became famous, and he still is. Today in Boston, Christ Church still stands. Only now it is called Old North Church. Paul's silver still shines. Paul's house still welcomes visitors. And Paul's bells still ring out for all to hear. The end.